Microchips, those tiny silicon brains inside our phones, laptops, cars, and even missiles, have become the center of a fierce rivalry between the United States and China. They're often called the backbone of modern technology, and for good reason. These little chips power everything from everyday electronics to cutting-edge military systems. In fact, semiconductors are so critical that some say controlling chips is like controlling the future, and neither the US nor China wants to fall behind in this 21st century tech race. But how did microchips go from a mere component to the cause of tension between superpowers? To understand why this is happening, we have to go back in time to when it all began. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Now let's rewind a few decades. The first integrated circuits, the ancestors of today's microchips, were invented in the United States in the late 1950s. Over the next few decades, the US became the early leader in semiconductor technology, with companies like Intel pioneering the microprocessor revolution. America's strength was in innovation and chip design. Firms like Intel, Qualcomm, Nvidia, and AMD led the charge in creating powerful chips. However, when it came to actually manufacturing those chips, things started to shift. By the late 20th century and into the 2000s, a lot of chip production moved to Asia, especially Taiwan and South Korea. It was efficient and cost-effective to outsource production. Taiwan's TSMC, for example, rose to become the world's top chip manufacturer. By 2021, TSMC alone was making 92% of the world's most advanced chips, the tiny high-performance ones at 5 nanometers and below. This meant that even though the US companies were designing the best chips, they relied heavily on overseas factories to build them. For a while, this global partnership worked fine. Meanwhile, China was playing catch-up. Through the 1990s and 2000s, China was not a leading player in semiconductors. Its industries still imported most of the chips they needed. As China's economy boomed and it became the world's electronics assembly hub, its dependence on foreign chips grew. By 2020, China was importing around $350 billion worth of semiconductors a year, more than it spent on importing oil. Think about that. Chips literally became a bigger import for China than oil, underscoring how crucial they are for both consumer gadgets and industrial and military tech. This reliance on foreign chips was a huge vulnerability for China, and Beijing knew it. So, about a decade ago, China's government made a strategic decision. We need to make our own chips. They announced ambitious plans like Made in China 2025, aiming to produce 70% of China's semiconductor needs domestically by 2025. They poured massive investments into the sector. By one estimate, over $150 billion was committed to build up China's semiconductor capability between 2015 and 2025. New Chinese chip companies and factories popped up. Names like SMIC, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp., YMTC, Yangtze Memory Technologies, and others, often with state support. President Xi Jinping often spoke about self-reliance in technology. The message was clear. China didn't want to be forever dependent on foreign silicon. This was driven by economic ambitions. Chips are a huge industry, and security concerns. No country likes its critical tech supply being at another country's mercy. For a while, the US didn't seem too alarmed by China's efforts. After all, China was still far behind in cutting-edge chips. But as Chinese tech companies like Huawei started to become global leaders, Huawei was poised to lead in 5G networks, for example, attitudes in Washington began to change. Let's fast forward to around 2018, which is when things really started heating up. In 2018, the U.S. government, under President Donald J. Trump, began a trade war with China, marked by tariffs on goods. But beyond tariffs, the U.S. also started targeting technology. A pivotal moment came when the U.S. slapped tough sanctions on a Chinese telecom company, ZTE, for violating export rules, nearly shutting it down by cutting off its access to U.S. chips. ZTE's near collapse sent a shockwave through China's leadership. It proved how dependent they were on American technology. Then in 2019, the U.S. took aim at Huawei, one of China's crown jewel tech firms. Citing national security concerns, the U.S. banned American companies from selling key chips and components to Huawei. This was huge. Huawei relied on U.S.-made semiconductors and software to build its smartphones and telecom gear. The U.S. basically put Huawei on a blacklist, the entity list, meaning any U.S. tech company needed special permission to supply Huawei. You can imagine how China viewed this. From their perspective, it looked like the U.S. was trying to kneecap one of their leading companies under the guise of security. The chip war was starting in earnest. By 2020, the U.S. tightened the screws even more. It wasn't enough to block direct sales of American chips to Huawei. New rules were introduced to block any chip manufacturer anywhere from selling advanced chips to Huawei if American technology was involved in the process. Since companies like TSMC in Taiwan use US-made equipment or software to design and produce chips, those rules meant even TSMC couldn't keep doing business with Huawei without US approval. Essentially, Washington extended its reach globally, saying if you use US tech to make chips, which virtually all cutting-edge fabs do, you can't sell certain chips to Chinese companies we're concerned about. This was a severe blow to Huawei's smartphone business. Suddenly, they couldn't get the latest chips for their phones. In response, Huawei and China started scrambling to work around these limits, accelerating efforts to develop chips in-house and stockpiling whatever they could. Around the same time, China also redoubled its support for domestic chip making because it was clearer than ever that the U.S. could choke off key supplies. Now enter the Biden administration in 2021 and beyond. One might have expected a softer approach, but in reality, the U.S. continued and even expanded the tech confrontation. In 2022, Washington passed the CHIPS and Science Act, a law that set aside $52.7 billion to boost U.S. semiconductor manufacturing and research. The U.S. basically said, we're going to invest in making more chips here at home. Notably, companies that take this funding are restricted from significantly expanding advanced chip production in China to ensure money isn't indirectly helping China's chip capability. But the U.S. didn't stop at bolstering itself. It also took direct aim at China's access to the most advanced chips. In October 2022, the U.S. government imposed a sweeping set of export controls to cut off China's access to high-end semiconductors and the tools to make them. This was unprecedented in scope. It basically said, high-performance graphics and AI chips, the kind made by NVIDIA, AMD, etc., cannot be sold to China without a license because they could be used in advanced military or AI systems. It also barred sending China the most advanced chip manufacturing equipment. Essentially, the U.S. aimed to freeze China's chip technology at a certain level, preventing it from obtaining the newest, fastest chips that are crucial for things like cutting-edge AI, supercomputing, and advanced weapons. Why such drastic measures? From Washington's perspective, it's largely about national security. U.S. officials are worried that China could use advanced chips to gain a military advantage or commit surveillance and human rights abuses through advanced AI, etc. Remember, chips aren't just about faster smartphones. They enable military tech like autonomous drones, precision missiles, code breaking, you name it. A U.S. Defense Department report noted that China's People's Liberation Army is pursuing next-generation capabilities defined by AI and advanced tech at every level of warfare. And China's President Xi Jinping has set a goal for the PLA to be a world-class military by 2049, with emphasis on things like autonomous weapons and AI-driven systems. But China cannot currently produce the most advanced chips needed for such systems. They still have to import those from elsewhere. So from the U.S. point of view, if they can stop China from getting the top-end chips, they can slow down China's progress toward military dominance. In short, Washington doesn't want Chinese AI-guided missiles or drones running on U.S.-designed chips. It's a bit like trying to deny an adversary the latest engine for their race car. Beijing, of course, hates this. Chinese leaders and media have blasted these U.S. moves as attempts at containment and tech blockade, likening it to a new Cold War. They feel the U.S. is unfairly maintaining its dominance by holding China down. And from China's perspective, the fight over microchips is as much about national pride and sovereignty as it is about tech. They don't want to be dependent or seen as second tier in such a crucial arena. By 2023, the chip fight only escalated. The U.S. managed to convince its allies in the Netherlands and Japan to join in and restrict exports of high-end chip-making equipment to China. This was critical because a Dutch company, ASML, is the only maker of certain extreme ultraviolet EUV lithography machines that are needed to manufacture the most advanced chips. Those machines are marvels of engineering, and without them, you basically can't mass-produce chips at the 5 nanometers, 3 nanometers, or smaller nodes efficiently. By ensuring ASML and certain Japanese equipment makers wouldn't sell top equipment to China, the U.S. dealt a heavy blow to China's hopes of making the best chips domestically. One U.S. official described the strategy as creating a small yard, high fence, meaning the U.S. is trying to target a narrow set of critical technologies, the small yard, and protect them extremely well, high fence. In other words, only the most advanced chip tech is being restricted, but those restrictions are meant to be almost airtight. Chinese officials, however, saw this as pretty much technological containment of China's rise. China did not take these blows quietly. They retaliated in some ways. For example, in mid-2023, China announced it would limit exports of certain rare minerals, specifically gallium and germanium, which are essential for making some semiconductors and high-tech components. This was a signal to the U.S. and its allies. We have leverage too, since we control some of the critical materials in your tech supply chain. China also targeted an American chip company, Micron, banning its memory chips from being used in Chinese critical infrastructure projects. This move was widely seen as payback for the U.S. restrictions. And beyond official actions, Chinese companies really began scrambling for solutions. Some Chinese firms started renting time on cloud servers or AI systems instead of buying the chips to get the computing power they needed. Others resorted to buying chips through intermediaries in other countries. Reports even mentioned a burgeoning black market for smuggled high-end chips in China. It's like water finding a crack. When direct routes were blocked, workarounds appeared. Interestingly, despite the pressure, China has shown some ingenuity in the face of these restrictions. In 2022, China's leading chip maker, SMIC, managed to produce a 7-nanometer chip, a level of tech not far from the cutting edge, even though they weren't allowed to buy the latest tools to do it. How did they pull that off? Essentially, they used older generation machines which operate with less advanced lithography like DUV and ran multiple passes and clever tweaks to approximate what an EUV machine could do. The result was lower efficiency and yield, not as cost-effective as, say, TSMC's process. But it proved a point. China can innovate under pressure and is closing the gap, even if slowly. And just recently, consumers were surprised when Huawei released a new smartphone in China with a 7nm class chip that appears to be made in China's own fabs, a sign that these efforts are bearing some fruit. From the U.S. viewpoint, that was unwelcome news because it showed China's tech blockade isn't watertight. So here we are in the mid-2020s watching this high-stakes contest unfold. Let's step back and look at the big picture of why the US and China are really fighting over microchips and what's at stake. Economically, whoever leads in semiconductors holds a huge advantage. The semiconductor industry is worth hundreds of billions of dollars and underpins trillions of dollars of downstream industries. Think of all the products that need chips. Control over chip tech means not just revenue, but also jobs and expertise. The U.S. has long enjoyed dominance in chip design and the high-value parts of the supply chain, and it wants to keep it that way. China, on the other hand, spends more on importing chips than anything else, and they see becoming self-sufficient in semiconductors as vital to their economic future. Both nations see chips as strategic. A recent example that highlighted this was the global chip shortage of 2021-2022, when pandemic disruptions and rising demand led to not enough chips to go around. This shortage halted auto production lines and caused prices of electronics to spike. It drove home just how essential and fragile the chip supply chain is. Prices for some chips jumped 30% during that shortage. The US and China both took note. They don't want to be at the mercy of such shortages or foreign suppliers in the future. That's a big reason the US is investing billions to build new chip fabs in Arizona, Texas, Ohio, and why even Taiwan's TSMC is investing $40 billion in a US plant. China, for its part, is investing heavily in new fabs of its own. Economically, each side is racing to secure supply and dominate the markets of the future, from electric cars to AI gadgets, all of which need chips. Militarily, we've touched on this, but it's worth underscoring. Advanced microchips are the linchpin of modern military power. High-end chips fuel supercomputers that modern militaries use for code breaking and simulations. They're in the guidance systems of missiles, the brains of drones, the sensors of surveillance platforms, and crucial for developing artificial intelligence that could give an edge in cyber warfare or battlefield autonomy. The US is basically saying, we will not hand a potential adversary the keys to outgun us. They worry China could surpass the US military in the future, and that cutting-edge tech, powered by advanced chips, would be a big part of that. Plus, there's the fear that US tech could be turned against the US. Imagine an American-designed chip in a Chinese military satellite or fighter jet. That doesn't sit well with Washington. On the flip side, China sees being cut off from top chips as a national security threat too. They don't want to be in a position where the US could cripple China's military or surveillance capabilities by severing chip supplies. So for China's leaders, building an independent chip supply is also about ensuring their military can't be strangled by a foreign power in a time of crisis. Technologically, control over microchips translates to control over the frontier of innovation. Chips enable AI, and AI is poised to revolutionize everything from healthcare to warfare. The most advanced AI models, for instance, need thousands of high-end GPUs or specialized chips, and right now, US companies like NVIDIA make the best of those. The US wants to maintain that edge in AI by limiting China's access to the top gear. We're essentially witnessing a race for who will lead in the next wave of tech, be it artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotech, which uses a lot of computing, you name it. Semiconductors are the foundation for all of these. If China keeps getting locked out of the latest tech, its progress in these fields could slow. If the US lost its semiconductor edge, it could lose leadership in all the industries that semis enable. There's also a human talent aspect. The best chip engineers and researchers, the best chip design software, EDA tools, etc., are largely in the US or US allied countries. China is trying to develop its own alternatives, for example, developing indigenous chip design software or even open source chip architectures like RISC-V to reduce reliance on Western tech. This tech race is not just about today's chips, but about tomorrow's breakthroughs. Each country fears falling behind the other in innovation. And there's a worry that this decoupling, splitting into a US-led tech ecosystem and a China-led one, might actually slow down global innovation. When two huge pools of talent and knowledge stop collaborating and sharing as much, progress could be less efficient. Some experts say the US restrictions and China's self-reliance push could create a kind of tech Cold War that dampens the kind of international cooperation that drove breakthroughs in the past. Finally, the fight has big political implications. It's a major facet of US-China strategic competition. Politically, being the leader in such a crucial technology confers global influence. Countries around the world are watching this tussle and, in some cases, being forced to choose sides or navigate between them. U.S. allies like Japan, South Korea, the Netherlands, and Taiwan are key players in the chip supply chain, and the U.S. has had to engage in a lot of diplomacy to align restrictions on China. China, on its end, is trying to rally support or at least sympathy, painting the U.S. actions as unfair and protectionist. Chinese officials often invoke themes of technological sovereignty and accuse the U.S. of trying to preserve hegemony. This chip conflict feeds into broader tensions. Trust between the U.S. and China has eroded, making cooperation on other global issues harder. When each sees the other as trying to block its progress, it breeds suspicion. We've seen a war of words too, with U.S. officials framing it as protecting critical tech from authoritarian misuse, and Chinese officials calling it outright suppression and containment. Domestically, both governments have used the chip issue as a rallying call. The U.S. talks about revitalizing American manufacturing and outcompeting China, while China talks about a new long march to overcome foreign tech strangleholds. It's geopolitical theater as much as it is business. Each side wants to show its populace and the world that they're the tech leader. And let's not forget Taiwan, politically a sensitive issue, which by sheer circumstance of hosting TSMC is right at the center of the chip world. The U.S. has a vested interest in Taiwan's security partly because of its technological importance, and China's interest in Taiwan has a tech angle too. The chip fight is entangled with the fate of a place that both powers disagree on politically. Now, you might be wondering, how does this fight affect the rest of us? Well, it already has. Consumers might see higher prices for gadgets if costs rise or if supply chains shift. Companies worldwide have had to change their supply chains. For instance, if you're a device maker, you have to ensure your chips aren't suddenly restricted. Other countries are also injecting funds to boost their own chip industries. Europe, for example, launched its own CHIPS Act to avoid being caught short. The rivalry might also determine what technologies become available. If two separate tech ecosystems emerge, one Chinese, one Western, we might see divergent standards or products in the future. There are also ethical issues in the mix. Allegations of intellectual property theft and espionage have long been thrown at China's efforts to catch up in tech, adding an extra layer of tension. For instance, there have been cases of engineers stealing secrets from chip companies or software to benefit Chinese firms, and some cases vice versa. This has made trust even harder to come by. At this point, neither side is backing down. In fact, both are doubling down. The U.S. is looking at closing loopholes in its export bans. For example, making it illegal for U.S. companies to even license advanced AI models to Chinese firms, or restricting cloud computing access that could let Chinese companies circumvent chip hardware bans. China is rolling out new incentives for any company, foreign or domestic, that can help its chip industry while also tightening its own tech export rules to retaliate. It's a tit-for-tat cycle. As one analysis put it, despite some diplomatic talk about finding common ground when it comes to the 21st century's most critical technology, the US and China are only moving further apart. So why are the US and China fighting over microchips? In summary, because microchips are power. Economic power, military power, technological power, and political power. Both nations know that whoever dominates the semiconductor industry will likely dominate key aspects of the global economy and security landscape. This isn't a trivial trade spat. It's often described as a new kind of Cold War rivalry with chips at the center. And much like the space race or arms race of the past, this chip race has the world holding its breath because its outcome will shape the balance of power for decades to come. Whether this conflict will intensify or eventually cool off is hard to say. Perhaps both sides will reach some agreement, or maybe one will leap ahead, technologically making the contest debatable. For now, what we can see is that microchips, those unassuming tiny circuits, have ignited one of the most important global battles of our time. And as consumers and citizens of the world, we're all along for the ride, watching this high-tech showdown unfold in real time. One thing's for sure, the next time you pick up your phone or laptop, remember that inside it lies a piece of this story. A microchip over which two superpowers are vying for supremacy. The chip war isn't just about technology, it's about the future, and everyone wants to win the future. Like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this.